welcome back to the Kingsway Podcast.
Welcome.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We have a brand new thing we're getting launched today.
Yeah, we're starting a new segment called Sunday Study Hall.
Sunday Study Hall. Kind of a fun little play on words.
Yeah.
Take you back to school.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also
and
on
if we have an intro graphic, this is where it'll go.
Well, it's kind of in true Trevor and Ryan fashion.
Yeah.
We came up with this creatively an hour and a half ago.
Yeah.
And we've been working on it for the last 20 to 30 minutes.
This may be the most prepared thing we've done for you in a long time.
In a minute, because most of the time it's off the cuff, good conversations, kind of creative, thinking through things, learning, or even just being surprised, like the verse of the day. We don't even know what we're going to talk about until we get
Verse
there.
of the day is always a surprise, but sometimes we've had conversations because it's like, oh, I just watched this cool video or read this cool book on atonement or on hell or on whatever.
Or
and then we're like, yeah. And then the whole episode comes out of not a ton of planning, but a ton of preparation that we didn't know we were doing.
Yeah, and it's almost like overflow of our conversations that are happening in our personal lives and our own spiritual growth.
Monday to Friday.
This is a little bit different in the sense of we're trying, because Matthew is what we are currently studying on Sunday mornings. The Gospel of Matthew. We want to take that and provide a resource and extend the conversation, extend the study from Sunday into the midweek. And so this is kind of the attempt to provide that kind of avenue opportunity.
Yeah.
And so we're going to intentionally kind of review the sermon and then go a little deeper.
Yeah, and we're reviewing it because maybe you were there on Sunday and you did hear it. But most people, when you ask them, I'm saying this out of personal experience with youth group here, when you're like, hey, what did we talk about even last week? They're like, what's the last week?
I don't remember what I ate yesterday.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know who I am. Same thing with Sunday sermons usually. And so this will, number one, if you were there for it, help you get connected and remain connected to what we're talking about. Number two, if you weren't there, like somebody here in the camera frame, or if you're listening on Spotify on the right side audio. Anyway, I was gone. It was my wife's birthday this week. We had a little trip to Kansas City that got extended by
an alternator.
Yeah. We're all fine. Nobody got hurt. We're all good. Maybe $900 lighter. But we have a working car. Anyway, so we missed the sermon. I caught a little bit of it, but this will be beneficial for me today and for this and any episode in the future. If you were not there for it, you can still engage.
Absolutely.
It's still free.
And it's still on our YouTube channel right now. It's on our Facebook page. If you want to go back and watch, you can always do that.
I haven't named any of them with the date that the service was on. So you kind of just have to go back through and guess a little bit.
Well, and
it'll say 1 month ago or one week
and
ago.
it'll click on there, and it'll give you most of the time at least a close understanding. And honestly, you can zoom through pretty quick and find it.
That's fine.
Well, and honestly, we're gonna kind of figure this out as we go, but we have a little bit of a format we're gonna follow. Try to keep this something that you know what to expect when you click on this, and it's something that you will engage with, even if you weren't there, or maybe you're forgetting, or maybe it was a really impactful sermon. I know for me, even myself, like week to week, like there's normally one or two things that stick out in a sermon, but there was lots of stuff said, if that makes sense. And I think these types of opportunities to take something a little deeper, hopefully it'll make it sink in a little further, continue the conversation, and help that stay. And honestly, there's some challenges inside this series where we're trying to read through the Gospel of Matthew as a congregation, as a community. We're trying to let the Gospel of Matthew not just stay on Sunday mornings, but flow into our lives, into our speech, into our understanding of who God is. And so this is, again, a tool, an opportunity, an intentional thing to try to extend that impact. And so that being said, Ryan was going to challenge me to try to review my sermon.
Yes, in a very short amount of time. Maybe in the future we'll have an actual stopwatch up here. I'll just use my watch. Maybe I'll even zoom in on like after the fact if I can even figure out how to do it.
So,
can I? I don't know.
Newsflash: if anybody is listening or watching, I do not write my sermons out word for word. I'm an outline guy. I have it in my head of what I'm going to talk about as bullet points, but I am more of just conversational. So my sermons, even in outline form, may not be word for word what I preach on Sundays, because it's like remembering a conversation you had about a great book, or a conversation you had about an event that took place in your family. Like, you may retell the story with similar details, or if my wife's listening right now, sometimes differing details.
Yeah.
But the generalities, it's pretty close to what really took place or what really happened. So I basically had a really difficult job this week of introducing the Gospel of Matthew and trying to start the first 17 verses, which, if you know anything about the Gospel of Matthew, it is the genealogy of Joseph. And so Joseph that ultimately leads to Jesus. And it is a very complicated set of scriptures that I'm excited to go a little deeper on. So I set the tone by trying to help you understand why Matthew is putting this at the center of his gospel, or at the beginning of his gospel, but it's going to be a central point. Matthew wants you to know that he himself was on the outside, but was included inside the kingdom of Christ, in the kingdom of Jesus. And from the very beginning, he wants you to realize that Jesus is the king, from all the way from Abraham to David, through the Babylonian captivity till now. Jesus has the prophetic and also the lineage to be able to claim that this is God's plan. And he includes names in the genealogy that just blow your mind. They blow your mind. And so what I tried to do is demonstrate that was the goal, but then also reveal that he's including people in this kingdom movement, this kingship movement of Jesus, like these foreigners, these adulterous women, these prostitutes, these incredibly outsider people, Tamar,
15 seconds.
Rahab, oh my gosh, this is horrible, Ruth, and Uriah's wife, which is Bathsheba, to ultimately do this. The Gospel of Matthew is going to change your perspective. He flips things on its head and presents Jesus as the answer and the king, but in ways you and I will be looking for but not expect. Matthew's Gospel is going to do this over and over again. It's going to show God's path forward, and the way he works in the world are unpredictable but very inclusive. The truth is, you and I are included in the line if we are willing to play our part and accept Jesus. So,
okay.
It was a fun sermon. And it was good, but man, I feel like there's so much more I'm ready to say and talk about. So thank you for this podcast to be able to have the opportunity. That was really hard.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready. I'm going to have to work on that.
Yeah. Maybe I need to work on giving you like time markers or put it in front of you in some way.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah.
I felt like we went from a minute 15 to 10 seconds.
So there's a lot included in this text. What was the most exciting part for you when you were studying about this? When you were thinking about preaching it, what was the most exciting part?
So the most exciting part is the thing I mentioned with the women, and mainly because of how we set this up. We set this up with Good Friday, talking about how in Matthew's gospel, he includes the hopeless, the people on the outside, the minimalized, because it seems to be a really key thing to him. And it seems to be something that really matters. And so when Jesus dies on the cross, Matthew's pointing out that Jesus has them as the central focus. Yeah. So then you go a couple days till Easter, and we talk about how there's a reason why Matthew did it. It's because he was on the outside. He points that out about who Jesus is, because he himself was a tax collector and was on the margins and needed to be brought in. And the gospel in Easter is very personal to him. It's not something he's trying to push onto someone. He's actually just talking about his personal experience and extending that personal gift to the world. And so Easter's personal to him, and it's personally supposed to feel personal for us because it was Jesus down. So then when you go and you read his genealogy, what was so exciting is you can tell that he could leave all of these women out of the genealogy, and it wouldn't change the genealogy at all. But for him to leave them out was almost like leaving his part of the story out, where the people that might have been left out, neglected, pushed aside, forgotten, he's like, no, they were remembered.
It's what we don't catch is how powerful and loaded these names are. It feels like if you would read a genealogy about somebody today, and it's almost like somebody reading down a list of names of presidents, you're like, oh, that makes sense. That if they were all father, son, and it was like passed down, whatever, that it would make sense that this next guy should be president because he's in the lineage. But it feels like Matthew's like, You forgot this like homeless one-eyed woman. You forgot Monica Lewinsky in the list.
Yeah.
You forgot Hitler. You
Yeah.
forgot whatever. Like he's throwing in all these super loaded, like wild names that maybe could be redeemed somehow, some way, but you didn't want to give them the time of day. They don't have the import. You wouldn't wake up early to meet that person.
Nobody was thinking of them in the lineage of Jesus. Not a single person. Like nobody was like, oh, you forgot them. The crescendo of the names is Rahab. Like she's the crescendo because she's not only, she's a prostitute in a brothel, and the spies of Jericho come in, the Israelite spies sneak in to kind of scout out the town. She hides them. They get away. She lays this basically fabric outside of her doorway so that they know not to crush it. She's saved. But what you don't realize in the moment that she's being saved, she's brought in as a foreigner, is that she is going to be the mother of Boaz. And I don't know how we preached 5 sermons on Ruth and never mentioned that Rahab was Boaz's mom. That blew my mind because that makes so much more sense to why when Boaz sees Ruth, a widower in the field and a foreigner, his eyes don't see Ruth. They see his mom. As much as they see, he sees his mom in a destitute
He has
situation.
compassion for her because he had compassion for his own mom.
Because his mom's told the story about how the Israelites saved her, brought her in, took care of her.
Now, it may not have been his mom. Mm-hmm. We assume that it is a true lineage, a true genealogy. I'm not trying to interrupt with my own facts, but something I was reading in one of the commentaries was that it was very important for Matthew to hit 14 in all these sections. Mm-hmm. And so all you have to know is that there is a lineage line between this person and that person somehow, whether they're his mom or his grandmother or his great-great-grandmother. Could just be mom. Could totally be that.
Could be that. I mean, the truth of the matter is it is direct lineage. That's the only thing you need to know.
But what he's presenting is direct lineage. Yeah.
So I do talk about that too in the sermon, where I talk about this isn't an exact timeline. This is God's faithfulness highlight reel. In fact, I have a line in here that I can read to you. It's not a timeline, but a highlight reel. It's God's faithfulness tracked through time, not an exact track of time.
Yeah.
Does that?
Yeah.
And so the 14 was really important because, and we can get into that, but the 14 was really important because of the Hebrew calculation of David's name in Hebrew letters. And 14 is what David, if every letter has a number and you add all the letters up by those numbers, it equals 14.
In Hebrew, imagine A is the number 1 and B is the number 2 and C is the number 3. Then what would Ryan add up to? That's going to take me way too long to actually make that number up, but...
And so
that's what we're saying.
David's 14. And so it's kind of like one of those things behind the list.
Yeah.
So I mean, what I was most excited about was just those little names that popped in there because there's 4 of them. The 4 ladies. Rahab, I feel like is the crescendo. Uriah's wife is the one that you're like, really? That's almost like when when Judas is going to be mentioned and they're like the one that betrayed Jesus. Yeah. Like that. It's almost feels like a little dig because you're David. And then Solomon, whose mother was Uriah's wife. It's like him coming back. The guy you murdered, David.
Yeah, little sidetrack, but I was just watching the Gilmore Girls episode where they do the living pictures thing. They're all painted to be people in paintings, and they open the curtain and you freeze whatever. And they did the Da Vinci or whoever's Last Supper with Jesus and whatever. And they have this guy playing Jesus who's pretty neurotic, Kirk, and he's like, what book should I read to learn about Jesus? And they're like, the Bible. He's like, okay. He comes back later and he's like, it took me 387 pages to realize he wasn't in the Old Testament. And you're like, okay. So then they introduce him to the cast member who's going to be Judas. And Judas is like, hey, Kirk, how's it going? And Kirk is like shrivels back in disgust. And he's like, yeah, I heard you guys are going to get shakes later. And he's like, you heard wrong. Just anyway,
that is awesome.
In a funny way, that's the attitude that you would want to say Abraham and David and feel pride. You would not want to say Rahab because you would not feel pride. You would feel shame. Usually,
you're starting to, and I didn't get to say this on Sunday, and I know that's
the next question. What did you forget to say?
So this is going to be an undertone of the whole thing, but the fact that he leaves this sin in the genealogy. like this big
Yeah.
sin of the last best king of Israel.
Yeah, Bathsheba.
Bathsheba is not mentioned. It's the sin is mentioned. It's, used to be this other guy's wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a sign that even the best and most beloved person of Israel needs something. It needs Jesus. Like, without Jesus at the end of this list is not going to lead to the new kingdom. And it's just a really cool way that Matthew is trying to say, like, even the best person that felt like was probably elevated to the place of spiritual, physical king leadership, they're on the outside without Jesus. They're not in. But with Jesus, they're in. And it's just such a cool thing to be able to see that so quickly in a list of people.
I am going to link a podcast episode in the description below that is somebody interviewing a guy who wrote a book about genealogies and is specifically talking about, in a little bit, New Testament genealogies. I don't remember if I listened to that before or after the sermon planning meeting. But he talked about the order that the genealogies were in. Did we talk about that?
I didn't get to say it, but I talked about it. So you need to tell him, because I didn't get a chance to say this because it was a really cool point. But that's the other thing I didn't get to do, is talk about Luke's versus this. So you keep going about this, because this is a really cool thing that's happening in this genealogy. In
Scripture, there are, I think, 25 or 27 genealogies. The guy said 25, but I don't know if he was including Matthew and Luke, and if he's just talking about the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So it's like somewhere around 25, give or take a few. And I'm pretty sure all but one start in the present and work their way backwards. That is the standard way of conducting a genealogy. In fact, for them to go from oldest to newest was weird. And they had established this precedent that when you do a genealogy, the last name you end up on, even if it's not Adam or whatever, the last name you end up on is the person, or sometimes they're just important names that redefine everything else. But they are the person who gives meaning to the first person. So if we have Jesse, the son of whatever, and you keep going backwards and backwards in time, then what they're trying to say is son of David. Oh, David gives meaning to who Jesse is. But Matthew is the one who flips that around and is going from the oldest. I think he starts with Abraham.
He doesn't start with Adam. The other one starts with Adam.
So he starts with Abraham.
Luke starts with Adam.
And people still feel the weight of Abraham. There are people in Jesus' day who say, aren't we all children of Abraham, or children of Israel, or children of whatever, trying to say that they're true Israelites. But Matthew goes through some of these sour, cringy names for the people in that day, and through the big important names, Abraham, David, some other people in there. And they gets to Jesus, and one thing he's doing is redefining everybody else before him because of the person at the end of the list. But he's flipped the list around to where Jesus is at the end of the list.
Which is wild. And I mean, there's so much in this genealogy that I wish we could have talked about.
Yeah.
There's some wild things in this. For example, in the last 14 names, I think there's 4 of them that don't exist in the Bible at all. Like, we have no record of them.
Yeah.
Like, they're so invisible that the Bible didn't even talk about them. But yet Matthews knows about them. Like, he's like, yeah, these guys. That's wild to me. Obviously, that's like part of the canon discussion, and that's a higher academic analysis. But
maybe it's in the Second Temple Jewish tradition. Maybe it's whatever.
There's some other Talmud and stuff that might include some of that stuff.
Yeah.
But it just made, it's kind of crazy when you go to look up a name and there's no reference in the Bible.
Yeah.
And you're like, but he made the list.
But
he made the list.
He made the list.
So, that to me was wild. I think not being able to talk about Luke's at all, I mentioned it once. I was a little disappointed that I didn't talk about it a little bit more. Luke's gospel is more of a doctor's approach, so he's doing more of the timeline version of a genealogy, tracking it from like Adam all the way up. But Luke is more doing the savior approach, where he's like trying to confirm that Jesus actually is like a savior Messiah, because he's talking to a
more
single
Greek audience.
Single Greek or Roman potential.
He's talking to the rest of the world.
Yes, and it's very different than Matthew. Like, he's almost just like saying, like, yeah, he's a real man. Like, he was a real man. I can track his lineage. rather than trying to say like he's from Abraham and the kingly covenant of God. Like that wouldn't have mattered as much to the Greek as it does.
Yeah, they don't know who Abraham is.
They don't know any of that stuff. So, the genealogies have very similar but very different approaches. And I think Matthew's is of course really fun. And I referenced this in the sermon, but Matthew has over 130 hyperlinks to the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And like that's wild. Luke, I think, has 30.
Yeah.
So it's like you can tell that Luke's doing enough research to know where this is coming from and where the meaning is, but Matthew's like hyperlinking the snot out of this paper to make sure that you know what he's saying is true.
I have one more thing to say about how Jewish and how deep and whatever this is, and then I want to get back to the questions I wrote down.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, there's one other thing. This is gonna sound like some beautiful mind, whatever.
Yeah,
but there's this practice that I think Trevor mentioned briefly, called gematria, where briefly in the sermon, not briefly here, where all the letters are also numbers, and so there were things that Jewish writers would do, especially very, very, very Jewish writers who are trying to write very Jewishly. This is more an insider thing, but they would kind of hide secret messages in. And don't shrug at me right now, audience.
National Treasure, got it.
National Treasure is on the back of the Hebrew Bible. No. You can see this a ton in John's revelation of Jesus at the very end of the New Testament. The book of Revelation has none of these are secret things. Before I get into anything else, you have to know that gematria, the whole number thing, will never tell you something other than what they've already been saying. It'll never tell you a secret message. It's just more proof that you're on the right track.
It's a deeper version of the same message.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So in John's Revelation, and I'll come back after I do this. In John's Revelation, there's a spot near the end of chapter 13. I think it's actually the last verse, where he uses the number 666. And people have this weird, freaky, like, it's the devil's number. I'm so scared. And it is in a scary spot in the book of Revelation. But he's not trying to say that that number, which is the mark of the beast, you shouldn't put it on your wrist for sure. He's not trying to say that is something that you will trip and fall into, and you fell for the devil's trap, and now Jesus can't save you. No weird, freaky thing. What he's trying to say is, there's this whole theology. Maybe I've talked about this on the podcast before, about having a name written on your forehead or on your wrist or something like that, on your arm. And it's talking about who you belong to. But that's from allegiance and obedience, not from
tattoos.
Accidentally. The book of Revelation is not like all stuff that's going to happen in the future. It's revealing what might happen in the future, but also what might happen and is happening right now. And what he's trying to say with that mark is that you don't see all the consequences of what you're doing right now, your compassion or lack thereof, your kindness and generosity or lack thereof. But in the spiritual realm, where all is revealed, when you pull back that curtain and you see what's going on, all your actions, your obedience, your allegiance, it's like it's written on your forehead. Like, it's so obvious. Everyone can see it. That's what he's trying to say, because in other passages they talk about, I'm getting back to gematria, I promise.
Yeah, no. I like this a lot, and it makes sense.
In other passages, I think, including the chapter immediately after this, it talks about the people of God having God's own name written on their foreheads, or sometime later being given a new name that nobody knows, only whatever. And so it's like, it's this weird, freaky language that we don't get. But all he's trying to say is, like, you belong to somebody and you don't think it shows, but it's like
as plain as the face,
awkwardly obvious out here for the
plain
rest
as
of
the
us.
nose on your face. I mean, that's I think for people that listen to that and hear that, you need to recognize that like all these things that Matthew's going to do as a hyper Jewish writer is similar to that with the 14.
All these texts, all these passages are meant for you to read it and then read it and then read it and then read it and then read it and just meditate on it forever. And what they're giving you is a way to solidify that message, but that you may only pick up on your 12th reading of it.
Yep.
Or if you read books from other people who have talked about it. Anyway, okay, so now that I've shown you that it's not a bad number to say and it doesn't give the devil permission to whatever. Okay, so that number is gematria. They are using, I think, Greek. to like kind of sneakily say somebody's name. So in another way, who you're allegiant to. And most manuscripts of the Bible, like the original manuscripts, they're super old that we use to confirm what we know now, say 666. And that is gematria for Caesar Nero or beast. Both of those add up to that. So the mark of the beast, what's the mark? It's the word beast. Or it's Caesar Nero, like a very guy who just the worst.
That burned down half the city and blamed it on the Jews.
It's like saying don't be a racist or you'll get the mark of the racist and the gematria and you figure it out and it just says like Hitler or something. And you're like, yeah, okay, that says exactly what I thought it said before.
Yep.
Anyway, that's what they're doing.
Yep.
So when we come back to the genealogy, you should listen to that podcast in the description. I'm going to just try to remember off the top of my head what he said. But the obvious thing is that even Matthew says it, there are 3 groups of 14, like 3 witnesses to testify to how 14 is the gematria number for David's name. They don't have vowels in Hebrew, so just DVD, not DVD. But that's David's name in Hebrew is just 3 letters, and that adds up to 14. So there's 3 times that to show like the fullness of how David-y he is. And then when you add up some of the numbers and some of the different sections, it'll either equal up to David times 10, which means something else in there or whatever. Or sometimes when you add up the sections, it's kind of Abraham and David. I'm going to let you listen to that. But nothing he's saying through any of these numbers is saying something different than what he's plainly saying.
Absolutely.
Which is like, he's the father of Israel. He's the real father of Israel in the line of Abraham. He's the real king of Israel in the line of David.
So this is my
statement. And all these people are in his kingdom and in his family.
To the Jews, this was Matthew declaring Jesus is the rightful king through the covenant of Abraham through the line of David.
Yeah.
Exactly. He's just saying that over and over and over in these cool little mnemonic number ways.
Yeah. Mark's gospel does the same thing in a sentence and in a more Romany Greek kind of way.
Yeah.
Where he says, this is the gospel of Jesus the Christ, the Son of God. What is he doing there? He's establishing who he is and why he has credibility. He doesn't have to do it in a super Jewish way. He's kind of just scribbling. He's going as fast as he can. But he's using language that's on all their currency. It's like if he said Jesus the Christ, the God in whom we trust, and we're like, that sounds like a dollar bill.
Yep.
That's what he's doing.
That makes sense.
In fact, that 100 years, 0 to 100, is when emperors of Rome started saying that they were sons of God and gods themselves.
Yeah.
And so it was on all their coinage, Divi Filius, son of God. And so Mark is establishing who Jesus is and that it's fighting words. And Matthew's doing the same thing, but in a super intricate, he's a numbers guy too. He's a tax collector.
Absolutely.
So super intricate, super interwoven inside references.
And this is such a fun way. And this is what the podcast is supposed to be. Just kind of like an extension of Sunday, letting this be a little bit of a study for you. Because if you go back and listen to that other podcast and you'll get, this is off the top of your head from listening to that, which I love. And again, you can't get into the weeds like this on a Sunday morning sometimes from stage.
There are people who have just shown up there and don't know much about Jesus or whatever. And you don't want to be like, but if you add all these names up and use your red twine around your things.
Absolutely. But I've said this from stage a lot. Like every number has a name and every name has a story and every story matters to God. Like we're going to connect it back to that. Like it's always going to be that. Do you have any more questions? What are some of the other questions that we have?
Okay. What would you change about your sermon?
I'll tell you, I was very nervous to read my sermon, and I was very excited that Nan Ketron came up there and sang her little jingle. I wish we had more time because I would have loved to try to learn it with her, like have her try to teach me.
That's terrifying.
It would have been really fun to try to do it together and just have her try to coach me through it, rather than just bring her up there for hopefully not public embarrassment and humiliation, which she killed it.
Yeah, thank you, Nan.
Thank you, Nan. But I think the other side of it is I wish I had a little bit more of a takeaway. I challenged everybody to read, but I wish I would have had a story or something that I could have kind of tied in that idea of like maybe their stories maybe your story is more of like the Rahab, and you thought you were going to be more like David.
Yeah.
Or maybe you thought your story was going to be more like, Josiah, but it's turned into more like Manasseh. Trying to recognize that like there's just, and maybe you need to remember, if you feel like Abraham, that maybe the story's not done being written yet. And like you may not see it, but you've had a huge influence. And like trying to attach it a little bit more.
Yeah. The way I've heard sermons like this, or sermons on evangelism, or sermons or whatever, wrapped up really well, that I wish I would have remembered when we were in that planning meeting, but God used it, and so whatever.
Yeah.
Is there? I've heard 1,000 different sermons from Matt Proctor, president of Ozark Christian College, where he'll throw out some name, and you're like, who's that? And it'll be like Sean Fogley or whatever. And he'll be like, you guys don't know him? And we'll be like, no, Matt, nobody knows him. And he'll tell this multi-faith generational story that weaves down to somebody we do know. And it'll usually go something like this. Sean Fogley or whatever was a construction worker in Idaho. And he just faithfully attended his church. He was single. He was mid-30s, and he served in youth group. And he invited large groups of kids over to his house to just like watch stuff and eat chips and whatever and just hang out and forge some relationships. So even though he didn't know the Bible super well, or even though he had never been formally educated in it, he had just been around it his whole life and just been open and welcoming. And that got this person excited about the faith, who then taught this person, who then whatever. And that's how you get insert huge name.
Billy Graham.
Billy Graham. Yes, exactly. Who is Billy Graham's Sunday school teacher and whatever. All these stories. That's what I wish we could have done to like have our own faith genealogy. And maybe we did because I wasn't there.
I have some stories like that, but those are always super powerful. I think the longer you live, the more of those you get.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I like that idea a lot. Well, I know there's probably 1,000 more questions, and we didn't get to a whole lot of the names in the list. And obviously, when you're reading through a lot of these ridiculous Zerubbabel, there's tons of wild stuff that we could even go further. I'm excited though to extend these conversations over the coming weeks. I will whet your appetite a little bit to the next one. John Coward is preaching this week, and we are going to elevate Joseph as we're kind of like giving him the title of the greatest stepdad of all time.
Yeah.
And just talking about how like that had to have been one of the hardest jobs on the face of the planet.
Oh yeah.
And and the Bible doesn't speak anything negative of him. And a lot of times when the Bible doesn't say anything negative,
we can infer a positive.
We can infer a positive,
generally positive
or we can infer that he did a pretty good job. And there's just a part of me that you see his faithfulness at the very beginning, and that's what Matthew records.
Yeah.
And there's just a part of you that seems like he was just a gentle, kind, faithful soul, and did his part. So anyway, whet your appetite a little bit to extend that conversation. Maybe we'll try to get John in here next week to have that conversation and kind of get his flow. But thanks so much for tuning in. If you have questions about what we talked about, or maybe there's something in this that you want to know more about, like let us know. We'd like to extend that to you, or just even reach out and talk to you personally. You can always subscribe or send this off to one of your friends or family or somebody else in the church that you think would value it or benefit from it. You can leave a review on Spotify or
Apple Podcasts.
Yep. And the easiest way to never miss anything is to honestly subscribe and just check back with us. YouTube's probably our favorite format just because of the video and you get to see us, meet us, get to know us a little better. But obviously we don't care any way you listen. Mom, we love you.
Thanks, Mom.
So, thanks so much for tuning in. And this is our first Sunday Study Hall of Many to come. And you were here for it. So gold star for you. Have a great and glorious day in the Lord.
Your trophy's in the mail.
See you later.